Russia's ramped up the Blitz, missiles and drone swarms shred Ukrainian lines.
They are bombing Ukrainians, trying to bomb and freeze them to surrender.
Putin thought he had Ukraine figured out. Cut the power, freeze the people, watch them beg for mercy by February. Classic supervillain playbook, right? Except there's a tiny problem with that strategy. Ukraine wasn't reading from his script. January 25th, 2026. Russia launched what they called the definitive strike, the kind of attack designed to end conversations. Kiev's energy infrastructure got hammered so hard that European analysts were already drafting their Ukraine at the breaking point think pieces. Putin probably kicked back with his morning tea, feeling pretty good about himself. And then Ukraine did something that turned Moscow's smugness into stone-cold silence. They didn't just hit back. They hit back so precisely, so devastatingly, that Russian state media went quiet for 6 hours. 6 hours. When Russian propaganda goes silent, you know something went catastrophically wrong. This isn't a story about resilience. This is a story about revenge served ice cold, and why the biggest military blunder you can make is assuming your enemy will stay defensive forever. Let's rewind to where Putin's brilliant plan started falling apart, which, spoiler alert, was pretty much immediately. December 2024. Russia's strategic masterminds looked at the calendar and thought, you know what would be devastating if we destroyed Ukraine's power grid right before the coldest months? Absolute genius. Nobody's ever thought of using winter as a weapon in Eastern European warfare. Napoleon and Hitler are rolling in their graves thinking, why didn't we think of that? The math seems simple on paper. Ukraine relies on centralized power generation. Russia has missiles, lots of missiles. Combine the two, add freezing temperatures, and boom, you've got a population that's too busy trying not to become human popsicles to worry about defending their country. Force Zelensky to the negotiating table, claim victory, go home. Except Ukraine had spent the last 3 years preparing for exactly this scenario. And I mean exactly this scenario. While Russia was apparently spending their military budget on yachts and telegram channels, Ukraine was decentralizing their entire energy infrastructure like they were speed-running a renewable energy transition. Here's where it gets interesting. Remember all those Western aid packages that talking heads kept saying were just money down a drain? Turns out when you invest in thousands of small-scale generators, mobile power stations, and local grid solutions, you create something way more resilient than a few massive Soviet-era power plants. Who knew that not putting all your eggs in one easily bombable basket was actually a good strategy? The Kremlin watched their missile strikes land, saw the explosions on satellite imagery, probably high-fived each other, and then watched in confusion as Kiev's lights flickered back on within hours instead of staying dark for weeks. It's like spending your entire bank account on a sledgehammer to break someone's window, only to realize they've replaced all their glass with transparent aluminum and your hammer just bounced off. But Putin doubled down. Because of course he did. Throughout January, the strikes intensified. Shahed drones, those Iranian beauties that sound like flying lawnmowers from hell, became as common in Kiev's night sky as stars. Hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, anything in the arsenal that could reach Ukrainian infrastructure got thrown at the problem. And here's the part that Western intelligence completely underestimated. Every single strike was teaching Ukraine exactly how Russia operates. Flight patterns, launch sequences, timing, weak points in Russian air defense. It's like watching someone repeatedly punch you in the same spot while you're taking detailed notes on their technique, just waiting for your turn. January 15th marked a shift. Russia launched what they genuinely believed would be the knockout blow, a coordinated massive strike targeting energy facilities across 8 Ukrainian regions simultaneously. The kind of operation that takes weeks to plan, costs millions to execute, and is supposed to make headlines worldwide about Ukraine's imminent collapse. Kyiv absorbed it, redirected power, activated backup systems, and by morning most of the capital was functioning normally. Russia had just spent a fortune to prove that their strategy fundamentally didn't work, but they were too invested to admit it. You want to know the real kicker? While Russia was burning through their precision missile stockpiles trying to freeze Ukrainian civilians, Ukraine was quietly stockpiling their own strike capabilities. Western-supplied systems, domestically produced drones, and a growing arsenal of long-range options that Moscow kept insisting didn't exist. The Russian Ministry of Defense kept publishing these elaborate infographics about how much Ukrainian infrastructure they'd destroyed. Percentages, charts, triumphant press releases. Meanwhile, Ukrainians were literally live tweeting from Kiev with full Wi-Fi, charging their phones, and posting memes about Russian accuracy. The cognitive dissonance was the chef's kiss. January 25th, 2026. The date Russia's military planners are going to see in their nightmares for years. The morning started like so many others in this war, with air raid sirens across Ukraine. Russia launched what their state media immediately dubbed the most comprehensive strike of the winter. Over 100 missiles and drones targeting critical infrastructure. Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Odessa. If it had a power station, it got targeted. This was supposed to be Russia's grand finale, the attack that finally broke Ukrainian resolve. Moscow's propaganda machine was already spinning up their victory narrative before the missiles even landed. Russian military bloggers were posting about the beginning of the end. State TV was preparing those dystopian graphics they love so much. Putin probably already had his speech written. And then, Ukraine went absolutely silent. Not panic silent, strategic silent. The kind of quiet that should have terrified Moscow if they'd been paying attention. Because while Russian telegram channels were celebrating their successful strikes, Ukraine's military was making final preparations for something that would redefine this entire conflict. Let me paint you a picture of what happened next, because it's genuinely wild. Around 2 a.m. Moscow time, when Russian air defense crews are at their groggiest and most complacent, Ukraine launched a coordinated strike package that was so perfectly choreographed it would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. We're talking simultaneous hits on targets spread across thousands of kilometers, time to overwhelm response systems and maximize impact. But here's where Ukraine got absolutely diabolical with their targeting selection. They didn't go after random infrastructure or civilian targets like Russia does. No. Ukraine hit the exact facilities that make Russia's entire military operation possible, and they did it with surgical precision that made Russia's precision strikes look like a toddler throwing darts blindfolded. First on the list, Russian oil refineries and fuel depots, not the big ones everyone watches. The secondary facilities that actually supply frontline operations. The kind of targets that don't make dramatic explosions on social media, but absolutely cripple logistics chains. Suddenly, those tanks rolling toward Ukrainian positions, they're wondering where their next fuel shipment is coming from. Then came the energy facilities inside Russia itself, specifically the ones providing power to military production plants and logistics hubs. Ukraine essentially said, "Oh, you want to play the energy war game? Let's see how your factories run without electricity." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But the absolute chef's kiss? Ukraine hit Russian air defense installations along their border regions, the very systems that are supposed to protect Russian territory from exactly this kind of attack. It's the military equivalent of punching someone's shield out of their hand before going to work on their face. Russian air defense crews watched Ukrainian drones and missiles coming straight at them and realized, with growing horror, that they couldn't stop them all. Not even close. Years of corruption had left gaps in their coverage you could fly a passenger plane through. All those reports about military readiness and impenetrable defense networks, turns out they were about as real as Putin's approval ratings. Within hours, fires were burning at multiple strategic locations across Western Russia. Satellite imagery started showing secondary explosions, the kind that indicate you hit something important, something with fuel or ammunition. Russian emergency services were scrambling to respond to incidents in 3 different regions simultaneously, and their coordination was, shall we say, less than impressive. The Russian Ministry of Defense's response? Radio silence for almost 6 hours. 6 hours. Russian state media didn't know what to say. Their standard playbook of, "we shot down everything," clearly wasn't going to work when half of Belgorod could see the smoke plumes with their own eyes. When they finally issued a statement, it was the most pathetic attempt at damage control I've ever seen. Minor damage to non-essential facilities, all fires contained, situation under control. Meanwhile, independent Russian media, the kind Putin hasn't managed to completely suppress yet, were reporting catastrophic damage to facilities that Moscow had just claimed were non-essential. Funny how a non-essential oil depot can cause regional fuel shortages, but hey, I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Here's what makes this strike absolutely brilliant from a strategic standpoint. Ukraine proved they can hit Russia's military-industrial complex whenever they want. Not might be able to. Not in theory. Can, did, will again. Every Russian commander now has to operate knowing that their supply lines, their fuel depots, their ammunition stockpiles, all of it is vulnerable. That's the kind of psychological pressure that makes military planning a nightmare. And the timing? Absolutely savage. Russia had just expended massive resources on their comprehensive strike that morning. Their missile stockpiles were depleted. Their strike aircraft had already flown their missions. Ukraine waited for Russia to empty their guns, then pulled out their own and returned fire. It's like watching someone throw their best punch, dodge it, and counter with an uppercut they never saw coming. But what really made Putin regret everything was what happened next in Russian domestic politics. Because suddenly, all those Russian citizens living in border regions, the ones who thought the war was something happening over there to other people, they could literally see it from their windows. The social contract of, support the war, but don't worry, it won't affect you, just shattered into a million pieces. Russian military bloggers, the ones who usually cheerleader every Kremlin move, went uncharacteristically quiet. A few brave ones started asking uncomfortable questions like, how did Ukrainian drones penetrate our airspace? And why weren't these facilities protected? Those questions didn't stay up long, but the damage was done. You can't put that uncertainty back in the bottle.